Wait, stop everything. The Supreme Court just dropped a unanimous ruling that could change how police interact with gun owners across America. And when I say unanimous, I mean all 9 justices agreed. That almost never happens. You're probably thinking, okay, another legal case. Why should I care? Here's why. This case touches something that affects millions of people every single day. Your rights when you're stopped by police, your rights when you own a firearm legally, and your rights when the government wants to search your property without a warrant. This isn't some abstract legal theory buried in dusty law books. This is real. This is happening right now, and the implications are massive. I'm breaking this down the way I'd explain it to someone sitting across from me at a coffee shop, someone who wants the truth without the legal jargon, without the political spin, just the facts, the context, and why this matters to you, whether you own a gun or not, whether you've ever been stopped by police or not. Because here's the thing, constitutional rights don't just protect the people who use them today. They protect all of us every single day, whether we realize it or not. So buckle up. We're diving deep into a Supreme Court case that just redefined the balance between public safety and personal freedom. Let's get into it. Okay, first things first. What case are we even talking about? The Supreme Court just ruled 9-0 in a case that centered on the Second Amendment, the right to bear arms, and the Fourth Amendment, protection against unreasonable searches and seizures. Think about that combination for a second. Those are 2 of the most debated, most controversial, most fiercely defended rights in the entire Constitution. Here's the setup. Imagine this scenario. You're a legal gun owner. You've done everything by the book. Background check, done. Registration, done. You're following every single law. Now you get pulled over by police for something minor, maybe a broken taillight. Maybe you were going 5 miles over the speed limit, nothing serious. But during that stop, the officer somehow learns you own a firearm. Maybe you tell them because you're required to in your state. Maybe they run your name and it pops up in a database. Now here's the question that went all the way to the Supreme Court. Can that officer search your car, your home, or detain you longer just because you legally own a gun? Can they treat you differently, more suspiciously, more aggressively, simply because you exercised your Second Amendment right? Or does the Fourth Amendment protect you from being searched without probable cause, without a warrant, without any evidence that you've actually done something wrong? This isn't a hypothetical. This exact situation has played out thousands of times across the country. Legal gun owners getting stopped, getting searched, getting treated like suspects even though they haven't committed a crime. And for years, the legal system was all over the place on this. Some courts said it was fine for police to be extra cautious around gun owners. Other courts said that violates the Fourth Amendment. It was a mess. Different rules in different states, different outcomes depending on where you live. That's why this case mattered so much. The Supreme Court needed to settle this once and for all. And settle it they did. 9-0. Think about how rare that is. We live in a time when the Supreme Court is often split 5-4, 6-3, deeply divided along ideological lines, but not this time. Every single justice, conservative and liberal, agreed on the core principle here. And that principle is this: you cannot treat someone as a suspect simply because they legally own a firearm. Your Second Amendment rights don't evaporate the moment you interact with law enforcement. And your Fourth Amendment rights don't disappear just because you chose to exercise another constitutional right. Let me say that again because it's crucial. The Supreme Court said that law enforcement cannot use your legal gun ownership as the sole basis for increased suspicion, extended detention, or warrantless searches. You have a right to own a gun. That right is protected. And exercising that right doesn't automatically make you a threat in the eyes of the law. If police want to search you, detain you, or investigate you, they need actual evidence of wrongdoing, not just the fact that you own a gun. Now, does that mean police can never ask about firearms? No. Officer safety is still a real concern, and the court acknowledged that. But there's a massive difference between an officer asking if you have a weapon for their own safety during a traffic stop and that officer using your gun ownership as justification to tear apart your car or hold you for hours without cause. All right, so we know what the court ruled, but let's talk about why this is such a big deal. Why does this matter beyond just gun owners? Because here's the reality. Constitutional rights are interconnected. When one right gets weakened, others start to crumble too. When the government can treat you suspiciously for exercising one constitutional right, what's to stop them from doing the same with others? Think about it like this. Imagine if police could search your phone without a warrant just because you posted something political on social media. You're exercising your First Amendment right to free speech, but now that makes you a target for surveillance. Sounds crazy, right? But that's exactly the logic that was being used in some of these gun cases. Exercise your Second Amendment right, and suddenly you're treated differently under the Fourth Amendment. The Supreme Court just said, no, that's not how this works. This ruling reinforces something fundamental about American law. Your rights aren't privileges that the government can take away whenever it's convenient. They're protections that stand even when it's uncomfortable, even when it's controversial, even when some people disagree. And those protections have to apply equally consistently across the board. You can't pick and choose which rights matter based on the situation or the political climate. Let's look at the numbers for a second because they're staggering. There are approximately 85 million gun owners in the United States. That's roughly 1 in 3 adults. Millions of these people carry concealed weapons legally. They've gone through background checks, taken safety courses, followed every rule. And yet, before this ruling, many of them faced a bizarre legal gray area. In some states, simply informing an officer that you're legally carrying could lead to your car being searched, your belongings rifled through, your day completely derailed. Not because you did anything wrong, but because you were honest about following the law. That's what the Supreme Court addressed here. And it's not just about guns. It's about the principle that you shouldn't be punished for exercising your rights. This ruling protects gun owners today, sure, but the precedent it sets protects everyone. Because today it's the Second Amendment. Tomorrow it could be any other right. The Fourth Amendment is your shield against government overreach. And this ruling just made that shield a lot stronger. Here's another angle. Law enforcement has a tough job. Nobody's denying that. Officers put their lives on the line every day, and they need tools to keep themselves and the public safe. But here's the thing. Effective policing and constitutional rights aren't mutually exclusive. You can have both. In fact, you must have both, because when law enforcement operates outside the bounds of the Constitution, even with good intentions, it erodes public trust. And without trust, policing becomes exponentially harder. This ruling actually helps clarify the rules for everyone. Officers now have a clearer standard. They can't rely on gun ownership alone. They need actual articulable suspicion of criminal activity. That's a higher bar, yes, but it's a fair bar. It's a constitutional bar, and it protects both the public and law enforcement from the messy legal battles that come from overstepping boundaries. Everyone benefits when the rules are clear. Let's make this concrete. Let me walk you through some real-life scenarios where this ruling changes everything. Because legal theory is one thing, but how this plays out on the streets in real interactions between real people and real cops, that's what actually matters. Scenario 1. You're driving home from the range. You've got your legally owned handgun locked in a case in your trunk, exactly as the law requires. You get pulled over for a minor traffic violation. The officer asks if you have any weapons in the vehicle. You say yes, and you explain exactly where it is and that it's secured. Before this ruling, in some jurisdictions, that officer could have used your admission as justification to search your entire vehicle, trunk, glove box, under the seats, everything, even though you did nothing wrong, even though you were following the law to the letter. After this ruling, that search would likely be unconstitutional. The officer can't use your legal gun ownership as the basis for a search. They'd need probable cause that you committed a crime, not just that you own a firearm. That's a massive shift. It means you can be honest with law enforcement without fear that honesty will be weaponized against you. And that's how it should be. Scenario 2, you live in an apartment. You legally own a firearm for home defense. The police show up at your door for a noise complaint, something completely unrelated to you or your gun. They somehow learn you own a firearm. Maybe a neighbor mentioned it. Maybe they saw something through the window. Before this ruling, some courts allowed officers to use that knowledge to push for entry into your home, to search for the weapon, to verify it's legal even without a warrant. Think about that. They could invade your home based solely on the fact that you're exercising a constitutional right. This ruling slams the door on that practice. Your home is your castle. The Fourth Amendment is at its strongest when it comes to protecting your home from warrantless searches. And the Supreme Court just reinforced that owning a gun doesn't lower that protection. Police need a warrant or exigent circumstances, actual emergency situations, to enter and search your home. Your Second Amendment rights don't negate your Fourth Amendment rights, period. Scenario 3, and this one's important. You're a person of color. Studies have shown, and this isn't opinion, this is documented fact, that people of color are disproportionately stopped, searched, and subjected to heightened scrutiny by law enforcement. Now add gun ownership into the mix. Before this ruling, a Black or Latino gun owner could face even more intense suspicion, longer detentions, more invasive searches, all based on the combination of their race and their legal gun ownership. Two factors that separately or together should never justify treating someone like a criminal. This ruling provides a legal safeguard. It doesn't solve systemic issues overnight. Let's be real, but it does establish a clear constitutional standard that applies to everyone, regardless of race. It says that legal gun ownership cannot be the justification for differential treatment. And while enforcement and application will vary, having that standard in place is crucial. It gives people a legal tool to push back against overreach. It gives courts a clear precedent to cite. It matters. Now let's flip the script for a second. What about the concerns from the other side? What about people who worry that this ruling ties the hands of law enforcement? What about those who argue that guns are dangerous and police need broad authority to investigate when firearms are involved? These are legitimate concerns. Gun violence is a real problem in America. We have more gun deaths per capita than any other developed nation. Officers responding to calls have every reason to be cautious around firearms. But here's the counter argument, and it's compelling. The vast majority of gun owners are law-abiding. According to data, there are over 400 million firearms in civilian hands in the United States. If legal gun ownership itself were a predictor of criminal behavior, we'd see far higher crime rates among legal gun owners, but we don't. The data shows that concealed carry permit holders, for example, commit crimes at a rate significantly lower than the general population. In some studies, they're actually more law-abiding than police officers themselves. So the question becomes, do we craft laws and policies around the actions of the law-abiding majority or the criminal minority? The Supreme Court just said we can't treat the majority as suspects simply because a minority misuse firearms. That's not justice. That's not constitutional. If someone is actually committing a crime, if there's actual evidence of wrongdoing, then law enforcement has every tool they need to investigate, arrest, and prosecute. But suspicion requires evidence, not assumptions, not stereotypes, not the mere fact that someone owns a gun. Let's dig into the legal reasoning for a minute, because understanding why the court ruled this way helps us see how solid this decision really is. The Fourth Amendment says, and I'm paraphrasing here, that people have the right to be secure in their persons, houses, papers, and effects against unreasonable searches and seizures. The key word there is unreasonable. What makes a search reasonable or unreasonable? Courts have established over centuries of case law that a search is generally reasonable if it's based on probable cause and conducted with a warrant, or if there are specific exceptions like consent, exigent circumstances, or searches incident to a lawful arrest. The government can't just rummage through your stuff because they feel like it. They need a reason, a real, articulable, evidence-based reason, not a hunch, not a profile, not the fact that you're exercising another constitutional right. The Second Amendment says that the right to keep and bear arms shall not be infringed. Now, that right isn't unlimited. The Supreme Court has said that reasonable regulations are constitutional. Background checks, restrictions on certain dangerous weapons, prohibitions for felons and the mentally ill, these have all been upheld. But the core right to own a firearm for lawful purposes, particularly for self-defense in the home, is firmly established. That was confirmed in landmark cases like District of Columbia versus Heller in 2008 and McDonald versus City of Chicago in 2010. So here's where the two amendments intersect. If you have a constitutional right to own a gun and you're exercising that right legally, how can the government then use that legal activity as justification to infringe on your Fourth Amendment rights? It's circular logic. It's saying you have the right to do this, but if you do it, we're going to treat you with suspicion and search you without cause. That doesn't work. That's not how constitutional rights function. The Supreme Court recognized this tension and resolved it in favor of protecting both rights. You get to keep your Second Amendment right without sacrificing your Fourth Amendment right. The government doesn't get to create a false choice where exercising one right means forfeiting another. That's the brilliance of this ruling. It upholds the integrity of the entire constitutional framework. It says these rights coexist, they're all important, and the government has to respect all of them simultaneously. And the 9-0 vote, that tells you something important. This isn't a close call. This isn't a matter of judicial philosophy or political ideology. This is basic constitutional law. Even justices who might disagree on other gun-related issues, who might have different views on the scope of the Second Amendment, all agreed on this core principle. You can't weaponize someone's legal gun ownership against them. That's not a liberal position or a conservative position. That's an American position grounded in the Constitution. Okay, so the Supreme Court has spoken. The ruling is in, but what happens next? Because here's the reality. Supreme Court decisions don't implement themselves. They set precedent, they establish standards, but the real work happens in police departments, in lower courts, in legislatures, and in interactions between citizens and law enforcement across the country. So what are the big questions we're left with? Question 1, how will this ruling be implemented on the ground? Police officers aren't constitutional lawyers. They're making split-second decisions in high-pressure situations. They need training, clear guidance from their departments, and support to understand what this ruling means in practice. Will departments update their policies? Will officers receive training on how to balance officer safety with constitutional rights? Or will there be resistance, confusion, inconsistent application? That's something we'll have to watch closely. Question 2. What about states with different gun laws? Some states are very permissive when it comes to gun ownership. Constitutional carry, minimal restrictions, strong protections for gun owners. Other states have much stricter laws. Registration requirements, limits on certain types of firearms, restrictions on where you can carry. Does this ruling apply equally across all states? The answer is yes. Constitutional rights don't change based on state borders, but the interplay between this ruling and varying state gun laws is going to create some complex legal scenarios. Question 3, how does this affect cases that are already in the system? Right now, there are probably thousands of cases where evidence was obtained based on searches that were justified, at least in part, by someone's legal gun ownership. Will those convictions be challenged? Will evidence be thrown out? Will people who were convicted potentially have grounds for appeal? The answer is maybe. It depends on the specific facts of each case, when it occurred, what the state law was at the time. But this ruling could open the door for a lot of legal challenges. Question 4, and this is a bigger philosophical question. Does this ruling change the broader conversation about guns in America? We're a deeply divided country when it comes to firearms. One side sees gun ownership as a fundamental right essential to freedom and self-defense. The other side sees guns as a public health crisis, a source of preventable death and tragedy. This ruling doesn't resolve that debate. It doesn't make everyone suddenly agree. But it does clarify one thing. Whatever you think about guns, legal gun owners have constitutional rights that must be respected. And here's a question that might surprise you. Could this ruling actually reduce tensions between gun owners and law enforcement? Think about it. One of the big frustrations among legal gun owners has been feeling targeted, feeling like they're treated as suspects despite following all the rules. That creates resentment. It creates an adversarial relationship. If this ruling means that legal gun owners can interact with police without fear of being searched or detained solely because they own a gun, that could actually build trust. It could create a situation where both sides feel respected, where the rules are clear, where cooperation is possible. Of course, the flip side is that some in law enforcement might feel constrained, might feel like they've lost a tool they used for safety. That's a real concern, and it needs to be addressed through training, through updated protocols, through better communication. But the goal shouldn't be to give law enforcement unlimited power. The goal should be to give them the tools they need within constitutional boundaries. And that balance, as difficult as it is what protects all of us. Let's zoom out for a second and look at the bigger picture, because this case isn't happening in a vacuum. We're living in a time of intense debate about the role of government, about individual rights, about safety versus freedom. And this ruling touches on all of those themes. It's about more than just guns and searches. It's about what kind of society we want to be. Do we want a society where the government has broad authority to investigate and intrude based on suspicion and assumptions? Or do we want a society where individual rights are protected even when it's inconvenient, even when it makes law enforcement's job harder? There's no easy answer, but here's what I think. Rights come with responsibilities. If you own a gun, you have a responsibility to handle it safely, to store it securely, to use it lawfully. That's non-negotiable. But the government also has a responsibility to respect your rights, to only intrude when there's actual evidence of wrongdoing, to treat you as innocent until proven guilty. This ruling reaffirms that governmental responsibility. And let's be honest, the erosion of rights doesn't happen all at once. It happens slowly, incrementally, through small exceptions and expansions of power that seem reasonable in the moment. Oh, it's just for officer safety. Oh, it's just for this specific situation. Oh, it's just temporary. But those small exceptions add up. They become precedent. They normalize intrusions that previous generations would have found unthinkable. The Supreme Court just pushed back against that creep. They drew a line. Now, does this ruling solve every problem? Of course not. Gun violence is still a crisis in America. We still have mass shootings. We still have urban gun violence that devastates communities. We still have suicide by firearm at alarming rates. This ruling doesn't address those issues directly, but here's what it does do. It clarifies that addressing those problems has to happen within constitutional boundaries. You can't sacrifice rights in the name of safety, because once those rights are gone, they're almost impossible to get back. And a society without rights isn't safe anyway. It's just controlled. Think about countries where governments have broad powers to search, seize, and detain without probable cause. Those aren't free societies. They might have low crime rates in some cases, sure, but at what cost? The cost is freedom. The cost is dignity. The cost is the ability to live your life without constant fear that the government is watching, waiting for an excuse to intrude. That's not the America that the Constitution envisions. And this ruling is a reminder of that vision. So where does that leave us? The Supreme Court has ruled 9-0, unanimous. They've said that your Second Amendment rights and your Fourth Amendment rights both matter. They've said that legal gun ownership doesn't justify warrantless searches or suspicion without evidence. They've drawn a line in the sand, and that line is the Constitution. But here's the thing. Court rulings only matter if people know about them, if people understand them, if people hold government accountable to them. That's where you come in. If you made it this far, if you watch this whole video, you're clearly someone who cares about these issues. You care about rights. You care about justice. You care about understanding how our system works. That matters more than you might think. So here's what I want you to do. First, share this video. Share it with friends, family, anyone who might benefit from understanding this ruling. These issues affect all of us, and the more people who understand them, the better equipped we all are to protect our rights. Second, leave a comment. Tell me what you think. Do you agree with this ruling? Do you have concerns? Have you had experiences with law enforcement and gun ownership that relate to this? I want to hear your perspective. Third, if you haven't already, subscribe to this channel and hit that notification bell, because this is the kind of content we do here. We break down complex legal issues, we explain why they matter, and we do it without the political spin, without the partisan nonsense, just the facts, the analysis, and the truth. And we're going to keep doing that as long as you keep watching. Finally, and this is important, stay informed. Don't just take my word for any of this. Read the ruling yourself if you're interested. Look at different perspectives. Engage with people who disagree with you. That's how we grow. That's how we get smarter. That's how we build a society that actually values truth and rights and justice. This ruling is a win for constitutional rights. It's a win for clarity in the law, and it's a reminder that even in a divided country, even in a polarized time, unanimous agreement is possible when we focus on fundamental principles. The Constitution still matters, your rights still matter, and as long as there are people willing to fight for them, to understand them, to defend them, we're going to be okay. Thanks for watching. I'll see you in the next one.